Well, good afternoon and welcome to the homestead. My name is Jonathan. Hope you are having a great day. It's cold, it is sunny, and it's snowing. So, welcome to Missouri. That's all I have to say. Now, if you're not from Missouri, you may think that that is a strange combination, but we just call that the everyday weather. Because it was, I believe, 63 degrees yesterday. So I've even donned my little hat here because my ears were getting cold. But we're going to have a great talk. I decided that I thought about moving inside and sitting by the fire because that sounded a little bit warmer, but I decided that porch talk just wasn't going to be porch talk uh, by the fire. So here we are. Well, I'm excited for lots of good things to talk about, and I'm excited and appreciate each of you joining us. Um, I'm going to lay out just a little bit as an introduction, kind of an overview of some of the things we're going to be looking at and discussing. I do have the comments opened over here so I can see them. So if you have a question or a comment, I'd be happy to try to answer that or speak to that in another video if we run out of time. I'm going to try to keep this to the point, but also take time to explore our topics the best I can. But right now, I think there probably is more to talk about than we have time. So we'll go ahead and make a comment, and we'll try to answer those. There's a little bit of lag, so if you offer up a comment and I have a little bit of a delayed response, well, I appreciate your patience with that. We have pretty good internet considering we live out in the middle of nowhere, but sometimes it's not the greatest, so the stream may get a little bit of lag, but hopefully it won't affect us too much. Well, let's jump into it. Really, the first thing that I'd like to do is, as we kind of sit down and talk, is to look back at some of our previous porch talks over the last couple of years and begin to explore some of the things we've discussed, some of the predictions that we made looking forward. I think the first time I really sat out on the porch and talked to you all was in 2020, just as the situation. You have to, on YouTube, avoid certain keywords because the algorithm will come and get you. So we'll call it the situation. Just as the situation was unfolding, and several of the things that we assessed or looked at came true, and so we were correct in those. And then there were some other things that we looked at and said that ended up not being the case. So we'll just take some time because I truly believe that failure is the great teacher. And I think as a believer myself, I want to be learning. I want to be understanding more about myself and my mistakes and things that went well so that I can, continue on the right path and, walk away from or learn from those mistakes that have been made in the past. So we're going to take some time over the next few weeks and do that. It is my intention for us to meet every Thursday at 3:30. So we'll get out, and I know many of you're at work, you've got things going, and so you can't really do a live stream or participate, and that's okay. That's just fine. Just watch it when you can, and feel free to send me a message or something if you have a question or a comment later. I'll try to answer those when they come. The second thing that I would like for us to take a look at, and I didn't actually have it on my schedule, but the situation with the Russian Federation and NATO and Ukraine has had some pretty big developments this week, and so we will take just a little bit of time and look at that. I do have some very good friends who live in Ukraine. My wife and I have been there multiple times serving on the mission field there, and so it is a place that is very close to our hearts. And while there's some good information being reported, there's also probably some things that are not being reported that I will try to share with you and just give you a little bit of information about that. And then we want to talk, and those are kind of some probably first things, let's say, for us to look at. But then over the next several weeks, I want us to take some time, and I've got kind of a list here on my iPad of topics that I think are relevant, and they're a list that many of you have expressed interest in discussing or have had questions or about. And so I've tried to do my own due diligence and research, exploring those and looking at those and trying to just glean some information that would be helpful and perhaps beyond what's just obvious about some of those things. Some of these topics are controversial. I understand. I don't really like to be controversial. That's not really my thing. But when you talk about truth and truth claims, and when you begin to share about those things that are really relevant in our lives, um, it can be hard. It can be a hard pill to swallow. And that's why the Bible says iron sharpens iron. So one man sharpens another. And so we can learn. I'm going to try to approach each of these topics with an open mind, as unprejudiced, unbiased as I possibly can be. I know that none of us are truly unbiased at all, but try to share those things in light of what's right, in light of what's wrong, in light of history. If you know me at all, history is a big thing for me, for a lot of reasons. One, I think we learn a lot from history and understanding what's happened in the past. Also, I think we can glean information about what is coming based on what's happened in the past too, and so that gives us information. And so I think history is an important part, and so we'll spend some time looking at that. So here, what are our topics? Well, the first one is something that's been in the news a lot, and I'll just kind of cut to the chase and not sugarcoat it for you. The metaverse is coming. And if you don't know what the metaverse is, if you don't like the metaverse, if you hate the movie Ready Player One, I don't know what to do other than just to help walk with you on that path. I do think if just looking at our government, our media, our corporations, the behavior of people across the world, nothing is accelerating as fast as the metaverse. What information am I basing that upon? Well, we have sales of metaverse devices. We have one of the largest tech companies, Facebook, now named Meta, reshifting and regearing and restructuring to move into the metaverse. We have new blockchain currencies, which we'll discuss as a separate topic, but new blockchain currencies that are already monetizing the metaverse. We have real estate inside the metaverse, some that is in the tens of thousands and millions of dollars in value. So there is a very rapid move, and I think the catalyst for that last year with Meta kind of jumping in that has caused a lot of other companies like Microsoft and Apple to realize, hey, we don't want to get left behind. We understand the metaverse is going to be like the internet. In fact, a lot of people are calling it, the Web 3.0 or the next internet or the new internet, because a lot of people aren't really sure what to call it. Will it really be called the metaverse in the future? Probably not. How many times do you actually use the word internet in your vocabulary? Probably not a lot. You say online, or I'll check this out on YouTube, or I'll search the Google or see what Siri has to say. We don't talk about it, but yet, well, I was about to say raise your hand, but that would be somewhat pointless right now. But really, how many? I was about to say days. Let's go with minutes. How many minutes do you go by in your life without you being on the internet in some way? Probably not very many. And if you're not on in that second, the phone in your pocket is on, and it's gathering notifications, it's gathering emails, it's gathering messages, it's gathering information about your shopping habits, and probably listening into your conversation so it can try to learn how to sell you something better in the future. So the internet is just a part of our lives, whether that's good, whether that's bad. I'm not making any statements about that. I'm just saying it is. And the metaverse is going to be just like the internet. It's going to be destructive. Well, there have been some destructive things about the internet, no question about it. But it's going to be disruptive in the way that the internet was disruptive, moving commerce from brick and mortar to online, moving communications from snail mail and from people just sitting down having a talk to across the globe, having to pay toll fees and go to extraordinary measures to get a message to another country now is just a quick, grab a phone out of your pocket, send a little message, go. So it's been a huge change. And if you're 30 or younger, then you've not lived to see that change. So you may just have to take my word for it that life is dramatically different. I mean, when I was a kid, my friends and I would go out to play in the neighborhood. There was no phone to check in with and say, "Hey, I'm not dead in the forest." There was no, spy whatever on my phone to track my movements or webcams to, check to see where I was at. There was only me showing up at dark whenever my mom said, "Hey, you need to be home at dark." That was how they knew that I was okay. And so some of you parents are just like, I can't imagine a world like that. And that's okay. But it's a huge change. And so we've just adapted. There's been things about that we really liked. There's been things about that we don't like at all. But it didn't matter whether we liked it or not. It was present, it was here. And so that's the situation with the metaverse. And so we're going to be exploring that, how we can recognize our part of that, what good it can do, what dangers are there so we can avoid them. And we're going to be discussing that. And if you're still kind of stuck on the first sentence and you have no idea what the metaverse even is, then we're going to take some time and define that so that you can understand what it is. The second topic that we're going to be taking a look at is our current economic situation, which is very purely an inflationary situation. It's inflationary for a number of different reasons. One reason that it's inflationary is because of the supply shortage. And this is why the Fed back last year, before everyone got scared about interest rates, was saying it's transitory because they were identifying only this one type of inflation, which is the supply chain shortage. And when that happens, basically you just have too many people, so that's high demand, chasing too few goods. That's low supply, and of course the price goes up. And so we saw that the Fed assessed, probably honestly. I mean, I'm not here to criticize anybody, whether they're on my particular political party preference or not, whether they're my religious beliefs or not, whether they're my rural lifestyle or not. I'm not here to judge anybody. I can work with anybody. I like all perspectives. I like diversity. It's what keeps us sharp, and it's what helps us learn to be well-rounded human beings. So as we think about that topic of inflation, not only do we have the supply shortage problem, though, we also have the money printing problem. Now, the money printing problem is something that we've talked about for years, both in PLG and on Porch Talk. It is something that has accelerated into a pretty significant situation. The stock market, of course, since the beginning of the year has had a terrible sell-off, and that continues today, although I think today's sell-off is more about heightened tensions in the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation. But we have a very hawkish Fed. Hawkish just means that they're pretty focused now on raising interest rates, cutting back quantitative easing, which is this kind of silly game we play of buying our own bonds. It's kind of like, hey, I have lemonade for sale, and you buy it from yourself, and you get and you pay yourself, and then you create the money that you bought it with. That's my low-tech, uneducated definition of quantitative easing. So that is now caught up with us because we have diluted the money supply so significantly that money has dramatically lost its value, even over just the last 6 months or so. So James Baker, good to see you, sir. Glad you're here. Thanks for checking in. Thanks for being brave. I know some of you guys are a little afraid to make a comment, so good job, James, for breaking us in this afternoon. So now some of you, whenever I start talking economics, some of you are really interested in it. You want to talk more about it. You want to get into that. Some of you, however, just kind of gloss over. You're like, don't care. And that's okay. And I'm going to try to discuss this topic in a way that's meaningful because, frankly, inflation, especially if you're a mom taking care of kids, maybe buying diapers, maybe paying for college, keeping food, in the house, and maybe talking your husband into going out to dinner every once in a while. Inflation's a big deal because the Olive Garden soup, salad, and breadsticks for $2.99 ship sailed quite a long time ago, and so things are very expensive, and that is only accelerating. We had 7.5 year-over-year inflation during the Fed minutes that were released, which would be for January, projecting 8+% for February's, which is announced in March. There's always about a 1 month lag, and from when the Fed meeting happens to when the Fed minutes are released. So if you hear that on the news, that's what they're talking about. There's minutes, which is kind of the recorded writing that occurs in the meeting, but that doesn't get released in the public or to the public until a later time. So, and of course, I guess that's a little bit confusing. The minutes are released pretty quickly, but the data that's in the minutes is usually about a month old. So there's kind of this lagging behind. And so a lot of people believe, in fact, honestly, I was one of them, that inflation would start to slow in January. For a few reasons. I mean, the global situation is becoming less. The supply chain situation, while in some areas is actually worse, but in other areas it is better. And so I really thought that we would kind of hit peak inflation and begin to come back down. That has not been the case. We are accelerating. That means higher housing prices, higher food prices, higher oil prices, and those things just, higher labor costs, and that just, increases the price of everything. So, let me zip my coat up here. It's getting a little chilly. Hopefully the wind noise isn't bothering you guys. I've tried to position myself away from that, but let me know in the comments below if the wind noise is bothering you. I'll try to move. But it's cold, so if I start talking faster and faster, we'll know that this video is about to become shorter and shorter. Now, I'm doing pretty good so far. So we'll discuss more about that. Third, Christianity and a biblical worldview is becoming increasingly perceived as hostile to modern culture. And so if you are a church person, someone that goes to church, if you're a Christian, or if maybe you're just kind of friends, or you're kind of out on the outskirts somewhere thinking about, or like Christians a little bit, or maybe occasionally go to church on Easter and Christmas, that belief system, that worldview, is increasingly perceived as hostile to modern culture. And so that has been a trend that has been going on really since the 1960s. I think it accelerated in the 1990s. That was whenever I was a young man getting married and kind of coming into adulthood. And so that period was another transition. And now there are some real specific hot button topics, like what constitutes a family, the idea that there is right and wrong, that certain actions are right and certain actions are wrong, and other things are being rejected more and more by our culture. And so that means that we, by our government and by that pop culture and by that media culture, see us as the enemy. In fact, we have a situation in Canada, which I'm going to reference just a little bit. I'm not taking sides. I'm not trying to say anything about that situation with the truckers. But what we do have is we have a group of people who believed something different than what the government believes. And because of that, the government has labeled them terrorists. They have used War Powers Act, or the Emergency Powers Act, to take away their freedom. So it's kind of like martial law, where they don't have to experience due process anymore. They don't have a right to a free trial. They don't, their basic rights have been revoked. And because of that, now the government has the power to do whatever harm to them they want. Their bank accounts can be frozen, their money taken. And so that is a little bit problematic if that were to happen in America, and if the government were to decide that there are certain beliefs in the Christian worldview or in the Judeo-Christian worldview that are threatening or hostile or from their perspective wrong, then we would become terrorists and we would lose our rights that we have. And so we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be discussing why that matters. I mean, I think that's probably obvious, but probably, it sounds a little extreme, although less and less extreme all the time. But we're going to be discussing what that means for our families, for our children, for our grandchildren, what we can do about that, what we should do about that, and how we can prepare for a period of time which Christians have experienced for decades, for centuries, when the prevailing winds, the culture becomes hostile towards their belief system. Now, if you're my age or a little bit older, that's probably a lot more difficult pill to swallow, because we have come out of an American culture that is very Christianized, where, especially in the 1950s and times before that, in the mid 1800s, at some specific times where Christianity really was the prevailing worldview in America. We've come from that somewhat, me even to a lesser extent, that some from that are boomers or from the greatest generation. But that is difficult because of our normalcy bias. We just have a hard time understanding how our beliefs could be seen as hostile from other people. And so we're going to try to take a look at that and try to gain some understanding, so that we can better communicate and respond to that hostility, and maybe help people that are new to our worldview understand what we're all about. In fact, my hope is that these series of videos, that it maybe half, maybe a third, maybe even a quarter of the people who watch will be outside of the church. And I would ask you this one thing: if you feel like the information that's shared during Porch Talk over this spring is meaningful, would you do just a few things for me? Would you click the like button below? Would you click the subscribe button? Would you click the notification bell so that you can be notified when new videos become available? And would you share this video to some of your other Facebook friends, or tweet it out, or maybe send it on Rumble or some social media that you like, so that other people outside of just our group of friends and associates can perhaps benefit and be challenged by some of the things that we're going to be discussing in these videos. And if you don't like it, well, that's okay. You can just turn this off and go do something that's more interesting to you. The next thing, the fourth thing that we're going to be looking at, is the change in our monetary supply and situation. Since I was a kid, the US dollar has kind of been the primary global currency, for lack of a better word. It's technically the world reserve currency, but really just for the common person, it's just what you transact in. And I'm a patriot. I'm very pro-American. I fly an American flag. I love this country. Sometimes I don't love some of the things that we do, but I am a very, I love my state. I'm proud of our heritage in many ways. So I want you to understand that when I make some of these statements, we do have a problem with the dollar, and that problem is that it is what is called a fiat currency. Now, fiat basically just kind of means it's artificial, or it doesn't have any inherent value. If you pull out a dollar bill or $100 bill, you'll notice that the dollar itself even refers to it as a note. So it's basically a debt instrument. So when you have a dollar, you're basically having the government say, okay, I owe you what the value of the dollar equals. Well, the problem is when you have a limitless supply of something, then each individual item inside that supply, it doesn't have a defined value. And that's what's one of the problems that's causing inflation. And so when did this happen? Well, without getting deeply into this topic, we used to have our dollar tied to something very valuable, such as gold. In fact, the American dollar was referred to prior to the last century as the silver dollar, and that's because it was based in precious metals. Later, even when we were on the gold standard, we also called it the petrodollar. Some people still call it the petrodollar, although more and more we're somewhat irrelevant in terms of the oil trade. But that fiat currency is causing a problem. And that problem is it is removing our freedoms. It is imposing a hidden tax on the population. And it is creating a situation where we can no longer work for, earn, and save for the future. And so we need something different. And for the first time, about 10 years ago, a brilliant gentleman from Asia created a new alternative. And that is what it's actually a blockchain currency, but it is what today we call a cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. And in this currency, there is no inflation, there is no money printing, there is no government who can control it. It's completely decentralized. Governments have tried for many years to control it and regulate it, and it does need regulation. I'm pro regulation. I know I just offended probably all the pro Bitcoiners out there, so I apologize for that. I feel like I'm a pro Bitcoiner, but I do think it probably does need to be regulated since it is a form of money. And in fact, because people are beginning to realize that the security of Bitcoin and that the freedom that is found from its decentralization, and that Bitcoin moves in a deflationary manner. So if you look at the pattern, if you want to Google that, just look at the last 10 years, Bitcoin has only gone up while the dollar, for example, and I'm not just, attacking the dollar, or I'm not really attacking anything, but you can look at the euro, you can look at the yen, you can look at whatever currency you want. Fiat currencies always go down. They're always inflationary, and that's because governments have the power to print more money. And that's a problem that every political party commits. So that's not a Republican Democrat thing. That's not that's not any side. That's just inherent in that currency. They always fail in the end. Fiat currencies always fail in the end because somebody eventually starts, the printing gets out of control, and just like in Weimar Germany, the currency goes to nothing. And so we need, and if it's not, a blockchain currency, then, you post in the comments below, what currency do you think would be the most beneficial for our nation, or for our new global monetary system? I don't guess I really care, but we need something that is going to not condemn our grandchildren to this servitude and this terrible inflationary tax that we have imposed by overspending for years and years and years and years and years. And so we're going to be discussing what blockchain currencies are. Are they good? Are they bad? There's a lot of just hype and false information out there. And so we're going to try to explore that and explore why it's very important, especially for Christians or for any group that needs a decentralized form of money so that they cannot be controlled, by a power, a central power that controls the money. So we're going to be talking about why that's important, and why, at least, Bitcoin, Ethereum, the other blockchain currencies that exist today, why they offer that potentiality. All right, and then lastly, we're going to be incorporating into each of our Porch Talks a study of what I call truth claims. And those are found, I believe, in the Bible. And today, we're going to look particularly in the book of James, and we're going to be looking at what I consider to be some pretty tall challenges to what it means to be a, if you're not a Christian, then you could think of this as what it means to be a moral person, to have moral values. If you are a believer, then you would understand that we would call that to be a godly person, or a person who is faithful to the Word of God, to what He's called us to do. And so we're going to be exploring what that means, why that matters, why the Bible is even relevant, why truth is even relevant, and maybe even having some discussion on good and evil, and is there really truly good and evil? And so I'm going to offer to you some challenges of why I believe there is a such thing as good and evil, and why I do think there are some absolute things that are right and that are wrong. Now, that's not to say that there aren't things that are opinion or, just preference. Those things certainly exist. So I'm going to be the last person probably to tell you that there's an absolute right and wrong about every little thing. What your favorite color can be, and how you spend your free time, and what kind of food you eat. By no means. Those are things that are preference, and they're not important particularly. I guess to say they're unimportant is not true, but they're not necessarily a moral good or a moral evil, for example. And so we're going to be taking some looks at those things in the book of James, and because really one of the points, significant points of these Porch Talks is just how can we live a morally good life? How can we be a Christian in a culture that's increasingly hostile, that has these financial challenges, that has these difficulties in just, I mean, some of us you're just trying to survive. You may be driving home today from work, you're watching this, you're just thinking, you know what, I'm just trying to keep food on the table, I'm trying to keep my job, I'm trying to be a decent parent to my kids or grandparent to my grandkids. And all this other stuff just doesn't matter. Just tell me how I can do that, and that's what we want to explore. And so we're going to take a look at that, and in particular, as we discuss and explore some of these topics, and that's just kind of some of the big ones that I've outlined and that people have discussed. There's going to be some other things, obviously, a lot more things beyond these that we're going to be discussing, but we'll kind of start in that place. But as we begin to look at worldview, we can see that this particular situation, whether you're talking monetary supply, economics, wars and rumors of wars, these things have played out among humankind for centuries. So this is really nothing new. I mean, in a sense, it is new because the metaverse has never been a thing before. I mean, there's never been a metaverse. So in that sense, I understand. But there are always new developments in technology, changes to our culture, wars and rumors of wars. These are cycles that have occurred since God placed Adam in the garden. And so we have the opportunity to use our minds, because the Bible says that we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. So it is a mind thing. So for some of you guys who don't like to get cerebral, I don't know what to say. I mean, life is cerebral because what comes from our thoughts, from our mind, well, that's what our actions do. And so we have to change things in our mind first. You can't just, gather up a bunch of emotional energy on January 1st and say, I'm going to be thin, I'm going to lose 40 pounds and, run into the gym. Because 9 times out of 10, and frankly, 99 times out of 100, that is going to end with failure. If you haven't determined in your mind and reasoned out why you are doing that, why you need to lose weight, or what the health advantages of that are, you're probably, when you're feeling emotionally down, you're probably not going to go to the gym. And so we're gonna challenge ourselves intellectually and cerebrally, not hopefully in a crazy hard kind of way, but just to kind of put some of the information that's flying at us from 1,000 different directions and focus it into how we're living our lives. And frankly, it's an interesting time because 40 years ago, information was very limited. You were relying on television and encyclopedias and word of mouth. And maybe you could say education as well for information. That's it. No email, no Google, no Siri, no Alexa. I mean, it was a very, very different time. And so this, something that is particularly unique about our period of history is that there is now actually more information available than we can process, which was not the case. Even when I was a kid, I can remember not understanding something, nobody knew the answer, and so I had to go to the encyclopedia or try to find somebody that knew the answer. And that it was a quest for information. I had more questions than there were answers as a kid. But today, I mean, and we're not just talking like there's a little bit more, there's a lot more. There are orders of magnitude more information that I could sit right here on this Razor book and gain for 1,000 lifetimes to digest. I mean, if you think about all the journal articles and news articles and information out there on, I don't even know how many websites there are. I'm going to guess in the millions. It would take forever to learn all that information. So why is that important? Well, it's important because we have to be selective on how we go about getting that information. Otherwise, we're just going in a circle, running around like rats in a maze, and we're just doomed to repeat the same mistakes individually and personally, as well as a nation, as a culture. And I'm not talking about, people outside the church. I'm talking about the church too, Christians. Sometimes we can have the worst communication to the rest of the world, in some of the ways that we act and handle situations, we are supposed to be a group of people that are full of love and mercy and grace. Yes, we set a high standard. Yes, there is right and wrong, there is moral good and evil, but sometimes we can come off as really snotty and as really mean. And while we need to come off as truthful, and we need to come off as people that aren't compromising or watering down what we believe. That's what the seeker sensitive movement did, and that was a disaster for the church, for Christianity, in my opinion. And I probably just offended, half the other people listening. So we'll see if there's anyone left at the end of this video. But my point with that is that we need to make sure that the message that we're communicating about the gospel and about who Jesus is the right message, because communicating the wrong message will continue to lead us into a terrible place, in a disastrous place. So I realize that's a lot to explore, but we're going to try to take some time and do that. And I think one of the periods of time in the Old Testament that is particularly relative for us in this kind of post-global situation time, as we go into this kind of hyper information age with the metaverse and with a lot of the new advanced robotic technologies that are coming out that are really going to change how our homes function, and then also becoming a multiplanetary species. If you did not see Elon Musk's annual report on Starship out at Boca Chica, Texas last week, you need to watch it. You will be inspired. When you see the Super Heavy booster with all 33 Raptor engines and Starship mounted on top, I mean, we should be orbital by the end of this year, and at the moon next year or the following year, and Mars very closely after that. And we're not talking about one ship, we're talking about hundreds of ships. I mean, they've already built hundreds of engines and dozens of ships. And I mean, he is not messing around with this deal. And so that's going to change how we think of ourselves if we become a multiplanetary species. And I'm pretty sure it's going to happen in my lifetime, and most assuredly in my children's lifetime. So those are things that are going to have a huge impact. And so going back and look at the Old Testament, there's a period for Israel, once they had taken the promised land, when they were ruled by the judges, there was this big transition that occurred in Israel for a multitude of reasons. And we're going to be looking at a lot of that, where they went from the judges, people like Deborah and Samson and Samuel, who I guess was a prophet, but also arguably one of the last judges. We're going to be looking at that transition into, you could call it a monarchy. Some people call it a theocracy. I would say it's kind of like a monarchical theocracy. I don't even know if that's a word, but kind of a combination of those things. And of course we have David and Solomon and Josiah and some of the other kings of Israel, and then Judah after the Civil War. But we're going to be looking at that period of time, and we're going to be looking at particularly at Samuel. Because Samuel was a very interesting person, and I would kind of see Samuel as someone a little bit like us, where there was an old world, and Samuel was a part of that world of the judges and of how things worked in that time. And then he began to see God transition Israel to that monarchy where they had a king and where things began to change. And it's a very interesting story, and we're going to be taking a look at that, and I'm really excited. I think it's a story, as I've talked to a few people about it recently, it's a story that I think a lot of Christians even are not fully aware of, and they haven't spent a lot of time exploring. So hopefully it'll be some new information, even if you have been in church for a while, that it could be something that we can take a deep dive into, and perhaps by looking at that situation, we can learn more about our own situation. So let me know in the comment sections, what do you guys think about that? Does that sound interesting? Does that sound uninteresting? Are there some other topics that you would like to take a look at and explore? So let me know that. Or if you're a little bit too chicken in the public comments, that's okay. Just send me a PM, and we'll take a look at those things. So hopefully that's been a good kind of an overview, for lack of a better term. Let me address just a couple things. I want to make a couple statements. about the situation with the Russian Federation, and then we're going to jump into James chapter 1 verse 19. That's actually where we are going to start. So if you are, want to kind of dive in and read along with this for that Bible study portion, that'll give you a little bit of time to be ready to go with that. Let me first just give you a little bit of background. I by no means am like the ultimate expert, but I have been there on 3 separate occasions, have a lot of friends there. And Ukraine is a very special place, in my opinion, for a number of reasons. First of all, Ukraine was a part initially of the USSR. That's the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. So if you're ever wondered, well, what's the U? Well, that's actually because Ukraine was one of the member. You can kind of think of it a little bit like states. They're called oblasts, and I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but they're regions. It's a little bit different, kind of like provinces, probably more like Canada, like Canadian provinces, like Quebec or Ontario or something. But they all kind of became this conglomerate of socialist states. And during that period after the Bolshevik Revolution and during the time of the Soviet Union, as probably more commonly we discuss, Ukraine, which like there were elements of Ukraine that wanted to be a part, but generally, like many of the other provinces or oblasts, were kind of forced into being a part of the Soviet Union for a number of different reasons that aren't not particularly relevant for this conversation. And what happened was during that time, if you were a Christian, for example, and you were not part of the approved church, state church, then you would just kind of get disappeared. It's a little bit like in China. You would just kind of go to bed, and if you were a non-believing person and you had a neighbor who was a part of that evangelical church, a lot of times in the middle of the night they would just disappear. And that's how the Soviet Union just kind of handled things. And I'm not trying to be objective. I'm not attacking anybody. I love Russian people. I have Russian friends, and so I'm not trying to say anything negative about that at all. I'm just trying to kind of take an account of what happened historically. So over time, the people that were part of that socialist nation, while it promised prosperity and fairness to all of the people, because really the idea of socialism seems to make sense at first, because it's just this idea that instead of like a monarch, having a few people, or an oligarchy where just a few people are wealthy and have all the privileges and everyone else is just a serf or a servant, that everybody can share things equally. Well, the problem is that somebody has to orchestrate that. And when that person who's orchestrating it gains the power to do that, well, it ends up being either an oligarchy or a dictatorship in the end, because that just doesn't work. Freedom is really the only way for people to have the opportunity to choose to strive or work towards something or cooperate for something. You can't really just be coerced into doing that. And so those countries were coerced. We went through this period of the Soviet Union, basically, that its kind of high time was from the end of World War II up until 1991, when a lot of those former provinces, they declared independence. They said, hey, part of what's happening with the Soviet Union anymore. Well, during that time, the United States had formed an alliance with a lot of its friends that it had worked with, and we had died with in the trenches and in the battles on the beaches of Normandy and the forest in France and Germany. And so we'd formed these alliances called NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Now don't run away, all right? I know that's a lot of big words and a lot of stuff, but just hang with me, because this is all going to make sense here in a minute. And so those allies began to work together to rebuild Europe to a large extent. That was really what it was about, rebuilding Europe, but also other things around the globe. And we determined to be an alliance that kept Axis type powers, so like Germany, Italy, and Japan, countries that wanted to infringe and steal from or oppress or hurt other people, like obviously Germany did with not just the Jews, but all of the people that it oppressed and murdered and killed during its time as the kind of the Nazi Germany after the fall of the Weimar Republic, which incidentally fell because of inflation and a lot of the things we're struggling with right now. Hopefully, that's not a prophetic statement. I'm just saying that matter of factly. So, 1991, Ukraine declares independence. They become a free republic. All right. So, like many of the NATO nations, which I know now we're kind of falling into this democracy thing, unfortunately. But originally, the United States was a republic, a free republic, just like Ukraine aspired to be, or still aspires to be today. And that sat for a while, after the Soviet Union collapsed. There was a lot of disorganization and chaos and economic strife. But once the Russian Federation kind of came back from that, they realized, like, hey, we lost a lot of our farmland. We lost a lot of the prestige of who we were. They just kind of longed for that golden age of socialism. And I think honestly, for a lot of Russians, like, they don't want to go back to socialism, but they do. It would be like this. It would be like if all of a sudden Texas and Missouri and Arkansas and Louisiana and like the whole Midwest, like, we just decided, like, hey, we don't really think like the East and West Coast, so we're just going to be our own country, all right? And so after a while, like, the West Coast and East Coast may be like, good, because we don't like cows. And we're like, okay, good, because we don't like, 40-story buildings in big cities. So, that's a way over generalization, but, for whatever reason. Well, eventually, though, the East and West Coast, they may get hungry and be like, hey, we really like cows, actually, after all, because we like cheeseburgers. So, then they kind of want the United States to be like it was. Well, in the Midwest is saying, hey, we're pretty happy the way we are. We don't really want to be a part of all that anymore. And so, we like our freedom. We like our guns. We like our, whatever, fried chicken. And we're just going to, you be there and be our friends, and we'll just live in peace next to each other. And the East and West Coast are just like, no, we don't really, you're just kind of in the middle of things. And now we have to, like, fly over you. And there's just a lot of reasons why we want to all be one big happy family again. Well, then the East and West Coast says, okay, so we're just going to build up a big military, and we're going to, take back all the Midwest countries by force. Well, that while it is a severe overgeneralization, that's kind of what is happening with the situation in Russia. Now, let me give you, that's kind of the macro view. Let me kind of give you a micro view. Of course, missionaries were not really allowed in the Soviet Union, a little bit like some other countries, socialist countries today. And so it has been hard for the ideas of freedom, the ideas of Christianity, to be a part of Ukraine up until the 90s, up until 1991. And as I've shared before, if you have talked with me long enough, I've probably shared with you the story of, the missionaries that went into Western Ukraine, the brothers that worked the farm very hard and are now pastors and church planters in a region in Ukraine. And they've just done amazing things because of the freedom that they've been given, and they've been able to raise their families and have prosperity, and their economy has prospered, and they've begun to trade with other NATO nations, like Poland and France and Spain, and a lot of those countries, and it's just been really great for them, and things have just gone really good, and they would like to continue that on. Well, the Russian Federation, kind of what was left of the Soviet Union, they have decided, we decided we want you back. We like the farmland, we like cows, and so we want Ukraine back. And kind of on top of that, if you listen to some of the people that have studied Putin, from kind of a psychological perspective, he has actually gotten very religious in the last 4 or 5 years. And he has kind of embarked on this belief that it's his calling, that the gods or whomever, the higher power has called him to, put back together the glory of the Soviet Union. And so he's on more than really, according to the opinion of those people that study him, he's on more than just a political, I'm trying to be a good president, I'm trying to get as much land and territory for my country as I can, which is how I think a lot of the media portrays him. But it's kind of gone more to a religious thing where he believes that it's his responsibility. And he probably, in his deep down inside, he's probably thinking, it's what's best for them, that we can just be one big happy family again. And that'll be more tax dollars and more resources for Moscow. And we can be a superpower again, and we can rival the United States. And we were the first people to put a things in space, and so we'll go back to that era. We're tired of the Americans and NATO doing everything and having all the money, and so that's kind of again, an overgeneralization, but just so you can get some understanding. Well, there's a lot at stake because you have a country here that wants to be free, and really they want to be a part of NATO, and Russia just does not want to have anything to do with that. And we are on the edge of what could be a pretty difficult situation. I mean, hopefully not leading to a third world war, because that would be an absolute disaster. But at the very least, we're entering into a new era of a Cold War. Probably not just with the Russian Federation, but with China. Because if you notice in the news, they have been forming a lot closer economic alliance. They've had joint military maneuvers. We're seeing kind of this axis, and again, that's, as an American, my perception. So axis may be an overgeneralization, but let's just say a different alliance of countries that have begun to come together. And some of it's for a good reason. Part of the problem with the dollar being the world reserve currency is that we can somewhat, and I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, but we do somewhat indenture or oppress the rest of the world, because when we print those dollars in order to pay off our debts that we can't afford, that causes that global monetary dollar to lose value. So in a sense, we are kind of stealing from them, stealing from the Chinese, stealing from the Russians, stealing from Iran, stealing from, and some of you may be thinking, well, I don't really care if we're stealing from them, but you should care, because we should be, if we're about freedom and opportunity here in America, well, then we should want to deal fairly with these other nations. So I'm not saying it's an excuse. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying we're right. I'm just saying that there are some reasons, and that's one reason out of a number of reasons why there is some friction between us and those other nations. And we've talked about China and Russia only, but there are other nations, obviously, that that would fit that bill or be a part of that. Oh, not resistance, but just that other alliance. And so we have a little bit of a dilemma there. And the other thing that's a little bit concerning about this situation, not only for our friends that are in Ukraine and a possible military action there, but China would absolutely love to kind of formalize its ownership of Taiwan, which is kind of in this halfway free, halfway part of China. No one's really for sure what it is exactly, but they make a lot of great stuff. Probably half the stuff that it's taken to do this broadcast today was made in Taiwan. And so, I mean, they're a very important economic and manufacturing center. And so we just have some things that have kind of been settled and at peace for the last several decades. All of a sudden, and I think there are some reasons why, but again, to not get too crazy, political, and controversial, I'm not going to state that on this live stream. But now that that is all coming to a head, we have some real problems. The biggest problem being we don't make our own stuff anymore. And because of that, well, Renfro Industries does, and there's a few other American manufacturers, but 90+% of all the stuff we have is made somewhere else. And the problem with that is if we destabilize, and maybe not us, if Russia or China destabilizes this situation, we're going to be in trouble. And it sounds like we have a very sad lamb over here that bottle lamb that wants to be fed. So hopefully she will give up here in a minute. But that could be a real problem for us because we like our stuff. And if we can't get it, it's going to go sky high, and we're going to have to actually learn to do without some of it. Some of it we don't want to do without, like our high-tech medical supplies that save lives and other things. So it's not just a, do without a new cell phone kind of a situation. It could be things that we really, really need. Things like transformers and that help with our power grid and just all of some of the basic staples of life that we really enjoy, but then also need to some extent. I mean, at the end of the day, really, you need a good pine tree over your head and a fire and, some food. But most of us, our standard of living's a little bit higher, and so we're wanting some of the other stuff. So I digress. So join me, please, in praying for our friends in Ukraine, that they would have a continued season of freedom, that they would be able to continue to exist as an independent nation, and that somehow this is. Thanks, James. I got to admit, my fingers are getting a little bit chilly, and my nose is definitely getting cold. So we'll probably, this is going to go from an hour and a half long live stream to probably more like an hour. But it is a serious situation. I don't want to overhype it and just be like, oh, it's World War III. We're all gonna die. I don't want to get crazy, but I certainly don't want to ignore it either. Just say, oh, it's just some other problem in some faraway place that I don't care about, because that both of those attitudes are probably unproductive. I believe that a helpful attitude is, hey, we got a real problem. Hey, thanks, man. I'm glad you and Lance are. I was hoping you guys were, so you can tell me later what I need to do to improve the stream. That's our tech guys and some of my really good friends there. I'm not sure what the George O thing means exactly, but that's okay. Jason, you can tell me later what that means. So pray for our friends in Ukraine. Pray for that situation. I think the best way to tackle it is to say, hey, this is a scary situation for everyone. There obviously are nuclear weapons involved. There are obviously a lot of guns and tanks involved. When you have 150,000 of some of the most professional troops on the planet all along your border, I mean, that's a reason to be concerned, obviously. And so we need to be praying for that, and we need to be preparing for that, because if there is a destabilization in the region, we're going to see that affect everywhere, and our measly little supply shortages that we think we have now are going to explode. And so hopefully cooler heads will prevail. We will work out some kind of a compromise that does not include splitting the country in half or something disastrous like that, but something that the Russian Federation could live with, and that NATO could live with, and that Ukraine can live with. But we're going to keep that on our radar, because probably as much as inflation and the global situation, this situation that is currently occurring, it's probably a pretty big deal. It's something that we need to be paying attention to. All right, so let's jump into James chapter 1. I'm going to open up my Bible here and take a look at that, verse 19. And guys, we're just going to jump right into the thick of it, where it says, everyone must be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Now, just in light of what we've just discussed about the situation in Ukraine, and probably you could apply any global tension or problem, whether you're talking about China and the challenges there, Iran, just a lot of the things that on and off have been a geopolitical challenge for the United States for the last 20, 30, 40 years. Well, since its beginnings, really. If we would have this attitude right here, just these three things, imagine how many millions of people would not have died in terrible wars. And I'm not saying all war is bad. There is a time for good men and women to stand up and do what's right. And so and we see many times, especially in the Old Testament, where God sent men out to war. So please do not hear me saying I'm anti-war or anti-peace either. All right, I'm just saying that there is an appropriate time and an inappropriate time. And when you just want to take from someone, that's not okay. And we should protect the weak. That historically, at one point, that was a mission of the United States. In fact, we inherited that from the British Empire, who, while they obviously had done some wrong things in their time, they did oftentimes liberate and assist peoples in the world and help them and spread the truth of the gospel message, and protect the innocent. Sometimes they were harming the innocent, but generally, as a rule, they were protecting the innocent from harm. And so there's a responsibility there. But in all of those situations, imagine if the leaders involved were quick to hear. So we're listening to everyone's opinion. We're considering your perspective, how this is going to affect you, and actually caring, because you would have to actually care, beyond that. But first listening. If you're not listening, well, you can't really care, because you're not going to understand. This is why Pastor Scott every Sunday says to his staff and elders, know a name and know a story. because if you know a name and you know a story, you're going to be a lot more likely to care. So, good words. He's a wise man. Glad he's our pastor and a good friend. Second thing, slow to speak. Wow. And frankly, honestly, that probably goes for all our celebrities. Well, maybe even all of our Christian leaders as well, all of our political leaders, if they were just a little bit slower to speak, because we're a little snippety, right? We always have to get our 2 cents in, and we always have to, just get the last word. And if we would just be a little bit slower to speak, and we would just stop, consider. It's interesting to me if you've ever been in a board meeting or just it's some kind of a business meeting or discussion. You got what I call the hotheads in the situation, and then you've got the people that appear to be passive, but they're just being quiet. They're just listening, and the discussion's going on, and they're just sitting there quietly, and they're listening, and they continue to listen and process and think about it. And then finally, when they do speak, oftentimes they settle or provide a solution for the problem that's at hand. And that's because they are quick to listen, slow to speak, and lastly, but not leastly, slow to anger. There's a lot of anger in the world. I mean, that's kind of like, well, duh, if that's what we're saying, I'm totally wasting my time on this live stream because I knew that one. I at least knew that there's a lot of angry people in the world. Well, I'm highlighting the fact that there's a lot of angry people in the world because that anger, that quickness to anger, just that is a not an intellectual response usually, it is an emotional response. And we're allowing our emotions to control us. And that is the opposite of what the Bible says for us to do. Because we want to speak loud. We want to not listen. And we want to get mad, right? That's just how we roll as human beings. And the Bible says do the opposite of all of those things. And so we have to go against what our emotions are telling us to do in favor of what our mind is telling us to do. So let's go on. Verse 20, for man's anger does not accomplish God's righteousness. Wow. Well, let that sink in for just a minute. Because a lot of times, think about it. Why do you get angry? Well, you get angry because somebody has wronged you, or you get angry because something is unfair, or you perceive that it's unfair. You get angry because you expected one thing to happen and another thing happened. So you have an unmet expectation, you become angry. There's a lot of reasons that we become angry, but if you think about it, a lot of times we're taking the place of God, right? When we become angry and then we act on that anger, we're trying to be God. We're trying to be false gods, but we're trying to play God. And so we don't accomplish God's righteousness when we are trying to replace him as the judge, right? And that's hard. When we feel instinctually compelled, boy, the sheep they're having a little drama. There's a little anger over here. All right. They're on cue. We practice this so that whenever I started talking about anger, they would start being angry and having drama over here. So, see, look at that. Look at that. See, I've trained my sheep so well. Okay, that may have not been entirely true, but it did work out really good. Going on in verse 21, therefore, ridding yourselves of all moral filth and evil, humbly receive the implanted word which is able to save you. Oh, what a rich verse. I hope this is not I'm not giving you false information, but to me, and I think there is a place for all of these things, but there are places in Scripture where it's kind of like bread, which bread is my favorite food, but it's not rich. It's just like that really good staple, like here it is, but it's relaxing, it's bread. And then there's like that triple chocolate cheesecake, Scripture that's it's so rich, it's just so thick and dense, and it's just kind of punches you in the face a little bit. And just some people, when I say that, they don't understand that. That's okay. I'm a little hard to understand sometimes, but it challenges you really, really hard, and that's what I love about this whole section in here that we're looking at tonight. So let's break that down, because that came at us super fast and super hard. We're going to be like that cooking show where you try to figure out what the ingredients are. Okay, so let's do that. So first of all, ridding yourself of moral filth and evil. So remember, the context is that we're trying to we're trying to go against what our flesh desires, just what we naturally as human beings, what we want to do. All right. And so when we start to do that, there's the three things we're looking at, which are we're quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Right. So that's what we're trying to do. And just think about that in a geopolitical sense. I mean, the whole world would be so much better off if everybody would just conduct themselves in that manner. Right. So, but then how do we do that? Because we know we're told here we're not accomplishing God's righteousness. We're not accomplishing anything good by doing those things. Okay. All right. So then how do we get there? What's the process? How can we be transformed by the renewing of our mind and accomplish these things? So this is what we're talking about. So the first thing, no surprise, the first thing is get rid of moral filth. All right. Well, what is filth? Well, this is kind of a PG stream, so we'll not get too crazy about that. But filth is just really disgusting things. Like some of the things that I really don't like, is like mold, rot, roaches. Which I realize roaches are decomposers. They have an important role to play. Whatever. I don't like roaches. I don't care. I can do spiders. I can do ants. I can do moths, but just roaches really bother me. Okay, not important. But think of that thing that you think is really filthy, right? And we got to get rid of that. We got to get those things out of our lives. And you know what they are. You know the things in your heart that are ungodly, unproductive, morally evil, And again, if you're watching this, you're not a believer, you're like, okay, that's just a lot of religious stuff. But that are evil, that are wrong, that are bad. Those are the things that we've got to get rid of those things. All right. Notice it doesn't say feeling bad about it. Okay, because this is what we do a lot of times as Christians. We feel bad about things, and we're like, "Oh, I'm such a good person because I feel bad about it." But that's not what it says at all. In fact, feeling bad about it and not doing anything is probably worse than just ignoring it, or I don't know. But that's a very undesirable thing. We need to rid, okay, which is a verb, all right? So to rid means to push off, to put away, to get rid of it, as we say in Southwest Missouri, get rid of it. And so we've got to choose to do that intentionally. It's not just going to happen, if I make some kind of religious decision in my life, then I'm all of a sudden going to be a really great person. Well, I wish it worked like that. It didn't work like that for me. I had to work really, really hard for years and years and years, and I'm still working hard, and I'm still on the journey, and I still have filth I'm trying to get rid of. So I think, unless I'm just really dumb, which could be the case, but I think that it's just a really hard process, and we have to be intentional and proactive in pushing those things off. All right, second, so once we get rid of the moral filth and the evil, we have to humbly receive the implanted word. Humbly receive. So in other words, we can't receive the truth arrogantly, right? Like if I already know everything, and we all know those people in our lives that know everything, right? I mean, which it means they basically don't know everything, but they think they know everything, which might be us. So let's be careful. Let's not be too judgy on that. But we have to recognize we do not. We have to recognize we could be wrong. I have to recognize that half the things I think and the way I perceive the world and my philosophy on life could be completely wrong. And so if I don't consider that possibility, then I really have no humility. And so really all of us, we need to lay down our preconceptions, our assumptions, our biases, our arrogance, and just to humbly say, I want to know the truth. I want to understand what it means to be a decent human being. And if we would do that, there would be power in that. It would be a part of that process of making right what has been made wrong. All right, and then nextly, and hold on, before we go on, not just generally humble, but humble so that we can receive the implanted word, all right? So that truth of God that permeates all things, that's why it's implanted. It's not just like, hypothetical or like this truth over there, but there is a truth that is the reason all this exists, I believe. There is a reason why those trees grow up, and there's a reason why there's gravity, and there's a reason why the earth spins, and there's a reason why it goes around the sun, and so systematically, like, it all there's reason for all of it. It seems to be a pretty big leap of faith to think that it's just random, or I don't know, that just kind of happens somehow. I don't know. I can't explain that theory, but a lot of people believe it's all just kind of random, and there's no, it just over millions and billions of years somehow it all just came together from nothingness. And I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm saying that somewhat arrogantly, so I apologize. I don't mean that to be arrogant. I don't understand how that works exactly. But I do understand that when I see a jar, somebody made that. When I see a house, somebody built it. When I see a tree, somebody planted it. So there's a prime mover, a first cause, a creator in those situations. And so for me, that's how I understand that there is the implanted word, because there is truth implanted in all of creation, in all of existence. And so that is what we strive for. And that here in this epistle is what James is trying to point us toward. Because, and we see this at the end of this verse, in verse 21, because it is able to save us. Save us from what? Save us from what, pray tell? Save us from the consequences of evil, which we'll talk about more. But we need to be saved. I mean, is there any person watching this stream that doesn't think there's evil in the world? Okay, so we're probably all in agreement on that particular one. So we need to be saved from something, all humanity, and it's even deeper than that, but we'll get to that. All right, let's go on. So, be doers of the word, not hearers only. All right, so again, this is the second time now we're seeing this theme impressed upon us, to be doers, not hearers only. Now, be careful here, because some of you just want to go out and do stuff. Okay, I'm raising my hand. That's me. Sometimes I'm just like, hey, let's stop talking about it. Let's stop dreaming. Let's stop, planning. Let's just go. Let's do it. All right. So I get that, but the problem is you can't just start doing stuff, because if you're doing the wrong stuff, well, then you're not really doing anything helpful. So we are not to be doers only, but not just hearers, right? So we need to hear, but we also need to do. So both of those things are important, to listening to the truth, acting upon the truth. All right? And then there's a great example here, all right, of how we're deceived, because it says, deceiving ourselves. So in other words, we're deceived because we're thinking, oh, if I just hear it, just kind of like I said before, well, then I'm doing something, which I'm not. So, and then we have an illustration, which I love, because I just sometimes need people to spell stuff out. So it says, because if anyone is a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man looking at his own face in the mirror. For he looks at himself, goes away, and immediately forgets what kind of man he was. But the one who looks intently into the perfect law of freedom and perseveres in it is not a forgetful hearer, but one who does good works. So in other words, when we hear the correct information, because we can listen to lies, which is not productive, but if we hear the truth and we act upon the truth, the fruit of that action is reinforcing, right? So it's like this cycle, it's like this circle. So I hear the truth, I act upon the truth, I see the fruit of my action, which encourages me to hear the truth. You can kind of see the circle. Likewise, if I hear evil and I act upon that evil, and now I have evil consequences, and I become angry and depressed and disillusioned, and now I'm going to be listening to that and seeing that in my life, and then I'm going to just keep that cycle of darkness. That's what we need to be saved from, is that cycle of darkness that exists not only in this world, but in another world, which talk about another time. Some of you might think of it as heaven and hell. So it's important for us to recognize and understand which cycle we're in. Are you in a cycle of goodness? Are you in a cycle of evil? Something to ponder and think about. So then it says in verse 25, in verse 26, if anyone thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, then his religion is useless and he deceives himself. All right? And again, not to attack any religion, But if you have a religious belief that is causing you to persecute and oppress others, well, then that's a problem. That's a real problem. And that's what we have to be careful of, that we are not following and believing and placing our faith in something other than the truth, which I believe comes from the truth of the gospel message. And then it says in verse 27, pure and undefiled religion before our God and Father is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world. All right, so we have two powerful truths here. The first one, and the example is orphans and widows. Okay, so it's not that the only good, moral good that there ever is to take care of orphans and widows. Although, frankly, we do not take care of orphans and widows enough, and that's probably a great starting place. If you're not loving on an orphan or a widow in your life, it is time for you to find one right now and to begin to serve them and help them. But that is an example, though, generally of being a servant, having a servant's heart, taking care of the least of these, being kind of like we were talking about earlier, being that stronger nation that protects the innocent, that protects the weak. You know, there's this big debate in the 90s. Well, I was actually in the speech and debate. That probably comes as no surprise when I was in high school. And one of the things that we debated is, should the United States be the world's policeman? Well, there's two sides to that story. I mean, truly there is. I mean, should us as taxpayers, should we be laboring and giving up our labor to fix every person's problem in the world? Maybe not. Maybe. Do we have a responsibility as the strong man, in the world, to protect the innocent and the weak? Well, I think this verse speaks to that pretty clearly, right? That we are to look after the orphans and widows because they have a disadvantage. They have a bigger challenge than what we might have. You might be an orphan or a widow yourself, but for those of others of us that are not, that may present a pretty difficult challenge. And so we need to understand what that means, what it means to be a servant. Not to throw pearls to swine, that's another biblical reference. That just means that we're to waste our time on someone who's not going to listen or be bettered by what we're giving, what we have to offer, but to bless those who are in need. So that can be a fine line to walk, and maybe you consider that, or comment in the comment section below what you think about that. But what we do know from the scriptures is that God has called us to be servants, and the second part of this, to be unstained by the world. In other words, to be faithful to the truth regardless of what the culture, what the world, what the government says. All right, I'm not saying to go be a vigilante terrorist, whatever. I'm just saying we should do the right thing and leave the consequences to God. And in the past few hundred years, the law and the government and Christianity or a biblical worldview have walked together. And we are in an environment where those are separating. And so depending on where you live, if you're watching this and what government you are under, the idea of a free republic is diminishing. And the idea of this kind of faux democracy, dictatorship, socialism is becoming the prevailing thought pattern. And the biggest moral evil of democracy is that the majority can harm the minority. That's why the republic is always a freer, preferable form of government, because the republic gives freedom and power to the individual rather than to the majority or to this kind of collectivism or, this let's punish the people who work hard in favor of those that don't kind of a mentality, kind of a thing. So that's a lot to ponder. That's a lot to think about. And so I would invite you to prayerfully consider, or just to intellectually consider that information. We're off and going. I hope that that tonight's just been maybe just a whet your appetite a little bit, and maybe challenged you to think about some things. Maybe I've caused an offense, and so I don't apologize in the sense that I challenged you, but if I hurt your feelings, I do apologize for that, because I would not want to harm anyone, frankly. But if I maybe, kept challenged you in a way that keeps you from burning your hand on the stove by telling you the stove is hot, well then hopefully, even though I maybe restricted your freedom temporarily, kept you from burning your hand. So hopefully that's a blessing to you. Thank you to everybody who watched, who turned in. Again, if you join later, I noticed a number of people join later. If you like, go back, watch the beginning. And if you got something from this tonight, would you please do the following for me? Would you click the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so that you can be notified when new videos come out and are available? And would you consider sharing this on your Facebook page or on your Twitter or somewhere in social media so that we can get this message out? We can increase our number of YouTube subscribers. I would love to hit 100 subscribers by the end of this month. We're at 82. Would you consider subscribing and helping us get the word out so that we could get past that 100 subscriber mark? Again, if you have questions or if you just want to talk more about something I said, please send me a message or post in the comments below. And I look forward to talking to you guys, and we will see you next Thursday, 3:30 p.m. Hope you have a great day. Be blessed.